This message is for you as an individual. It's just for you. Every single theme that we're going to talk about changed me a lot. And this message radically changed my life at 2 o'clock in the morning. And I want you to turn in your Bibles to the Gospel of Luke. We're going to take a look at a passage, Luke chapter 19, verse number 11. And this is a parable that not too many people speak about. It's called the parable of the minas. It's very similar to the parable of the pounds or the talents, but it's very different. Verse number 11, Luke chapter 19. Now, as they heard these things, the is the disciples, as they heard these things, Jesus, spoke another parable. You know what a parable is, don't you? It's a fictional story that somebody made up, typically on the spot, where Jesus was trying to teach a truth and wanted to put that truth into a story that the people would never forget. Because people oftentimes forget your points, but if you have a gripping story, they'll never forget the story, and you can weave the message into the story. Jesus made up a story on the spot. It's a fictional story. And he taught some terrific truth. But why did he make up the story? Well, look at the next word. He spoke another parable because. This is the reason. Because what? Because Jesus, was near Jerusalem. And because they, the disciples, thought the kingdom of God would appear immediately. As you may know, they were coming down from the north in Israel, down to south to where Jerusalem was, and they were thinking this is when Jesus is going to set up his kingdom. This is when there'll be a great war. This is when the Romans will be overthrown. This is when Jerusalem will become the center of the earth. The Gentiles will bring the wealth, and that we will rule the 12 different tribes, just like Jesus promised. But Jesus had been telling them, without them actually hearing it, I'm not setting up my physical kingdom now. I'm setting up my spiritual kingdom now, but not my physical kingdom. And he wanted to answer a question they weren't going to ask till later, which was, if you're not setting up your kingdom now, and you're going away, and we can't follow you now, and you're going to be in heaven for a while, and then you're coming back the second time to set up your kingdom, what on earth are we supposed to do between your first and your second coming? You've been with us all this time. You've told us what to do. You've trained us. What are we supposed to do between the first and the second coming? And that question still remains for you and me today. What am I supposed to do? What are you supposed to do between the first coming and the second coming of Jesus? So take a look at verse 12. Therefore, because they thought the kingdom was going to happen, therefore, he made up a story. And he said to them, a certain nobleman, which is him in the story, went into a far country, that's heaven, and to receive for himself a kingdom. And after he gets the kingdom, he returns. So here's what's taking place. Jesus is talking to them. A certain nobleman himself goes into a far country to receive a kingdom for himself, and then to come back and return. So what does he do in between the two periods? Verse number 13. So he called 10 of his servants, delivered to them 10 minas. A mina is amount of money, and each one got one, received one, and said to them, here's what I want you to do while I'm gone. I want you to do business until I come back. This is pretty typical back in the time of the New Testament, where when the owner of an estate left, he would assign to the people that worked for him, his slaves or servants. And sometimes Jesus is using an illustration that he wanted his servants to make money for him. I went to the ATM machine at the hotel this morning to get some money, to use it as an illustration. So Jesus comes and he gives to each of the 10 people a mina. He doesn't give a different amount, like the parable of the talents where you got according to your ability. In this illustration, everybody gets one, gets a mina, a hunk of money. And then Jesus says to his servants, I want you to do business with my money, make it grow. I don't care how you do it. I don't care how you do it. That's up to you. But while I'm gone, I want you to make money with mine until I come back. Well, obviously, Jesus isn't going to give the disciples money while he's gone. Well, what's he trying to do? He's answering the question because they thought he was going to set up his kingdom, and he's not going to set up his kingdom. And therefore, he's not talking about real money. He is in the story, but he's talking about you and me. And he says, I've given you a life. And while I'm gone in heaven, and Revelation teaches he hasn't received that kingdom yet, then he's going to come back, and he's going to want to know, what did you do with you? What did he do with you? And the interesting thing about this is Jesus gave it as a command, and he said, I command you to do business for me. I am not suggesting you do business for you. I want you to do business for me. I want you to take yourself, because you are the greatest asset you have, is you. You've been created in the image of God. You have unlimited creativity. What you can do is beyond what you can imagine you can do. Can you imagine taking out a cell phone to a guy born in 1800? And he says, what is this? He says, no, I can speak to somebody on the other side of America. No, you can't. Yes, I can. How can you do that? I can talk into this box. You can talk into the box? Yes. How does it get to the other side of America? Well, it goes through the air. It goes through the air. You can yell loud enough and it goes through the air and it gets there? No, and how does he hear it on the other side? He has a box like this. He has a box like this. What does he do with his box? No, he puts it next to his ear. Well, what does he hear? Me speaking. He can't hear you speaking. He's too far away. No, in fact, I can see him. Where is he? No, he's on here. He can't fit in here. What do you mean he's in here? Well, let me show you. And you get FaceTime and you begin talking to him. What would he think of this? Guess who made this? People who decided to make it. They're just like you and me. You have unlimited creativity. Everything you see in this room, except the live flowers given to Lois, was made by somebody else, and it wasn't God. It was made in the image of God. Every single thing, a light, the sound system, the stage, the carpet, everything, that's you. And therefore, Jesus doesn't tell them what to do. He said, no, I don't care what you do. It's up to you what you want to do with you. But while I'm gone, I want you to take you and maximize what I want done on the earth for me while I'm gone. So here's the question as we get into this. What did you do for Jesus this past week? I don't mean coming to church. You're not doing anything. I'm doing it right now. And the choir was doing it. And that amazing lady who was singing, I thought she was going to go right off into heaven. And the guy next to me, he could not remain seated. He was holding the chair, and finally it was too much. And he got up and he started to dance. It was wonderful. Oh, what's my point? What did you do last week? Not what did you want to do? Not what you thought you should do. What did you do? What did you do with you that he wanted done? And my question is next week. What did you do? What are you planning on doing? When you think about this, you and I only have three things, actually. We have time. We all have the same amount of time. I can use the time to do whatever I want. It's my time. I have some talents. Not very many, but I have some. You have some talents. I had nothing to do with my talents. I'm responsible to grow them and maximize them, but they were given to me. You have talents. Everybody does. And we have treasure. We have some money. What we do with our money. That is the mina in this passage. Your time, your talent, your treasure. So this past week, how much money did you use in doing business for Christ? You mean real cash? Real cash. What did you do? Don't say you don't have any money. Sure you did. You bought a Starbucks. Every day you bought a Starbucks. No, I'm kidding. No, maybe I'm not. So my question is, he's trying to answer this question between the first and the second coming. And he says, I want you to do business till I come. You know what he didn't say? I will do business for you till I come. Or I will do the business in you till I come. No, you do business, which means you can do a little bit of business, a medium size, or a lot of business, but really it's up to me and it's up to you. Take a look at what happens. Verse 14, kind of a little parenthesis, but his citizens, not his servants, but his citizens hated him, hated Jesus, nation of Israel, and sent a delegation after him saying, we will not have this man to reign over us. And so it was, and Jesus is jumping to the end of the story here, when he returned from where? From heaven. Having received the kingdom, he then commanded these 10 servants to whom he had given the money to be called to him that he might know how much. Jesus is concerned with how much. It's how much. How much every man had gained by trading or doing business is the Greek word there. I never was taught that God cared about how much. And yet Jesus' whole point is, while I'm gone, take your life and produce a lot of how much. How much every man had gained by trading. Jesus gave everybody the freedom to do whatever they want with their time. You could get up right this minute and walk out of this at your time. You could get out of the store and go over to Chili's restaurant and buy whatever you wanted. That's your treasure. You could do whatever you want this afternoon. It's up to you. And Jesus delegates that to me. But the only thing he wants is, I give you one. What are you giving me when I come see you back? Because you have your whole life to produce much for me. So let's see what takes place. Verse number 16. Then, at the second coming, came the first servant of Christ, saying, Master, your mina has earned 10 minas. Man, to grow your wealth 10 times, not doubling, not tripling, not to grow 4 times, but to grow 10 times. You know, the ATM only gives $20 bills. So here's a $20 bill. That's a mina in the story. Jesus leaves. You do business. Maximize my kingdom until I come back. Then I'm going to call you, and I want you to tell me how you did. You gave me 20, and I grew it 10 times. 10 times. 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120, 140, 160, 180. Man, if I came to you this afternoon and said, if you give me $100, next year I'll come back and I'll give you $1,000 plus your 100 you gave me, how many of you'd be interested? That's growing 10 times. That's amazing. What's Christ talking about? Let me get real to the point. You're one. Grow your impact 10 times. Why? Because you can. You can do 10 times more? Yes. You notice it's not Jesus saying, tell me what you did. He doesn't care what you do. Just keep it legal. He wants to know how much. What are the results? Let's keep going with the story. So what's the difference if a person does or does not produce a lot for Christ in their life? We'll take a look at what he says. Verse number 17. And Jesus said to him, well done. Why? You grow something 10 times? That's a well done. Good servant. Why is he a good servant? Because he did exactly what the master wanted. You do business any way you want, and he grew it 10 times. And here's the part that's shocking. Because you were faithful in a very little, have authority over 10 cities. Do you see the connection? What you do in this lifetime before Christ comes back again, wait till we get into this tonight, affects everything that happens to you in heaven or the second coming when the kingdom begins on earth. And Jesus linked it. You took one and made 10. Therefore, that growth is how many cities I'm going to let you reign for me in eternity. Do you realize then what takes place here? Life is a testing ground in which Jesus is giving you everything he gave to everyone else. At the same time, a number of talents and a certain amount of money. And he says, I want you to multiply it as much as you can. And if you multiply your life and the results of your life are 10 times, there is a 10 times consequence to you on the other side. I was trying to explain this to our children when they were younger, and I drew on a piece of paper, I drew a green line. I taught this many years ago. And I said, this line represents eternity going in both directions. Only God is the green line. And somewhere on this green line is a little tiny purple dot that I drew. And I said, that's our life. On the space of eternity, it goes this quick. It's there and it's gone. Sound like my father now. It's over. It's quick. It's not over, but it's quick. And I said to them, that one line determines everything in your eternity. And I drew a purple line that went on forever. And I said to the kids, we're not eternal, but we are immortal. We don't go on forever this way, but we live forever that way. We have no end. We may die on this earth, but all we do is move. It's forever. And I said to them, do you realize, I put an X here, that little dot determines where you go when you die. It's what you do in that lifetime of mine and yours, and it has to do what I believe. If I believe and put my faith in Jesus who died for my sins and rose again, then God opens the door of heaven, and where I go determines by what I believe somebody else did. Jesus died 2,000 years ago. I put my faith in him. My faith opens the door, and I enter into heaven. But heaven is a whole other issue. Just like there's one earth. But isn't there a big difference on earth? The third heaven where God dwells is one place, but it's very different. And the kingdom when Jesus Christ rules and reigns on the earth. And what Jesus is revealing is there's another thing on your purple dot. It is your behavior. Is what do you do for me? If you do little for me, that proves to me that I am not going to trust you to do something significant afterwards. There's a connection that somehow there's this big divorce that once I believe in Jesus, there are no consequences to how I really live my life. And Jesus is saying, It's a huge consequence that what you do here determines what happens to what he can do for you on the other side. Well, take a look at the next verse. Is what changed my life is the next two verses. The second one came saying, Master, your mina has earned 5 minas. Likewise, he said to him, well done. No, he didn't. Good servant. No, he didn't. And you can rule over 10 cities. No, he didn't. And I remember at 2 o'clock in the morning, the Lord opening my eyes to this passage. And I said to him, why is it that this guy didn't hear the well done? And why didn't he get the good servant? And why didn't he get 10 cities? And the answer was very simple. He could have had 10. He could have had 10. Every one of my 10 servants in this parable could have had 10. This isn't according to your ability. We're all the same in this parable. And I sat back and said to myself, am I a 10 mina person? And said, I'm not. I'm not. This many years ago. And I remember getting down next to my chair that evening, 2 o'clock in the morning, and just repented that I wasn't a 10 mina man because it never hit me before that God wanted 10 minas from me. From me, he did. And the only way there's going to be 10 minas is if I get them for him. And I was thinking that night about John chapter 15, where it says this, by this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit. That's that same idea, the quantity. And so I remember the next morning sharing with my wife that I found out that I wasn't a 10 mina person. And I asked her to forgive me for that as the head of our house. And then the next morning, I called a special meeting at Walk Through the Bible of all the team members, and I told them about this and apologized to them and said, even though we're ministering all over the country and some other places in the world, yet we're not a 10 mina ministry. And starting today, we're going to learn how to do that. That issue of repentance, of not really knowing how to do it, initially anyway, but being committed to become a 10 mina person. It's when you take your talents and actually say, I'm going to use it to multiply more for the kingdom. I remember we were down at the Hilton Head. Our family was on vacation. And we decided to go to a little church right there where we were staying in a condo for the week. And it was about 200 people, and we sat in the back, and it was great just to be anonymous and just to enjoy a service. And afterwards, we were coming out and shaking hands with the pastor, and the pastor says, don't I know you? I said, no, you sure don't. No, this is the first time I've ever come here. No, you look familiar. I said, a lot of people think that. I don't know why they think that. Did you write a book? And I said, well, yeah. Did you write the Prayer of Jabez? Oh, I did. Oh, that changed my life. And he began to talk, and I said, man, it's terrific. Your church is a buzz. He said, well, it didn't used to be. It didn't used to be. He said, no, we doubled recently. You doubled. You went from 200 to 400. Yep. He said, would you like to know how? Oh, I wanted to know how. He said, one morning I was standing at the door just like this, shaking hands with my parishioners as they're leaving, and one of the guys came who's a senior VP of marketing for a national firm. And he said, I wasn't even thinking this. I just said it out loud. And he said, I said to my friend, you're going to have to answer for Christ for this. And the man said, I'm going to have to answer to Christ for what? Because you could have used your skill that you have in the marketplace to help us. What are you talking about? Could you double the church? Could I double the church? You mean from 200 to 400? Yes, of course. That's a little thing to do. That's only 200 more customers. He said, I wouldn't do this. A VP wouldn't do this. A director wouldn't do this. I would use a brand new hire to do this. This is only 200 more people, for Pete's sakes. And the pastor said, can you do it in the next 30 days? And the man said, well, sure, of course. And he said, that's exactly what he did. He doubled the church. Somehow we don't take the gifts that we have here, bring them over to what can we do for. He didn't have to leave his job. He didn't have to leave his job. He had to bring the expertise here into the kingdom. Could you, some of you are really good in social media, who type in the things with 2 thumbs. If a bunch of you, 15 to about 30-year-olds got together and just use social media, you could double the church in a week. Yeah, you could. Don't tell me you couldn't. Of course you could. It's this issue of understanding the significance of what you do with your life. When Jesus said, here's what I want. Seek first the kingdom of God. Why? Because when your life is over, everything that happens to you enter into heaven. It's dependent upon whether you sought my kingdom or you didn't. I remember coming out of seminary and talking to my classmates and asking them what they wanted to do. And so many of them said, I want a nice small church, about 150 people. And I want to preach the word faithfully for the next 20 years and study it in depth. Isn't it interesting, the definition of faithful from Jesus' point of view isn't what it was when we came out of seminary? Take a look at his passage there. Verse 17, well done, good servant, because you were faithful in very little, have authority over. What does it mean, Jesus, to be faithful? It means this. I commanded you, do business for my kingdom with everything in you until I come back. Being faithful means that's what you did. You took 1 and you made 10 times more from your life. That's what faithfulness is. It doesn't mean you do the same thing for 39 years. This is what happens after 39 years, and the issue that came before us, and what's taking place across the street, and what's taking place with the unwed mothers, and what's taking place in the Bible college down the street, and what's taking place with the schools. That's productivity. Yeah, but my question is, what about you? Yeah, but what about you? What are you actually doing with you? And there's this great big wall that goes up in our minds because we can't really put it together that you can do whatever you choose to do. If you ask yourself the right question, what does God want done? I remember I was meeting with a whole denomination of pastors, and the denomination leader asked me to come in for 2 days, and the denomination was going downhill. And before I got up to speak, the different pastors got up and they announced how many people it was a year ago and how many was now. And if you didn't go down, you got an applause. Because they were applauding the fact that it is out of our control. Society doesn't care, and the new generation, and all this stuff, which isn't true at all. And I made up a story called a parable. I didn't have myself singing in the parable, but only the parable, I decided I'd act out the parable. And this is exactly what I did. I came off the platform, and I said outside that door, outside come in, was a man in a black pinstripe suit with a red power tie, had a brown satchel, briefcase, very refined, walked over to this man and says, what do you do? He says, I'm the pastor, tell me your name. He said, that's what I thought. How many people were coming to your church when you started? 60 people. And how many people are there now? 68. 68. How long have you been there? I've been faithful 22 years. So he spent 22 years getting 8 more people. And God thinks that's good? You don't know what to do with this truth today. Because some of you haven't felt the weight, W-E-I-G-H-E, the weight of realizing God's not responsible, I am. He commanded me to do business. So this attorney comes over and he says, I have a client who's very wealthy and his daughter goes to your church and you were able to save their marriage. And it meant so much to my client that he wants you to help other people in the small town that we live in. And he opens it up and he says, here is $1 million in cash. If you will double your church in the next 12 months, this money will be given to you, not to your church. And he wanted to know, will you double your church in the next 12 months? Absolutely. Think about what you just heard. Then out of that door, in a robe, came none other than Jesus Christ in my story. And he walked over and everybody knew it. And he walks over to this gentleman here and says, what do you do? I'm a pastor of a church. And how many people come into your church when you came? 120. And how many are there now? There's about 180. And how long have you been here? 18 years. And Jesus said to you, you know, I created you myself. And I gave you every gift you needed. And I put you in the family I wanted. And I gave you my Holy Spirit with all the power there is. And I gave you the Word. And I placed you in all the world and all of history at one time, in one place, because of how I made you. I made you to help those people. And I wanted you to reach the whole city for me because you could. And if you don't get after it and double this church in the next 6 months, you've lost your right. And I'm taking the church away from you. Just like I promised in Revelation 2 and 3 with the churches in Revelation, that I will come and close your church because you are disobeying me. And I want to know, will you double your church in 6 months or not? Guess what he said? Then I walked over here to one final pastor, asked him the same kind of numbers. And I said, out of that back door comes the mafia with AK-47s. And they came right up to you and said, sir, we have taken your wife and your 3 young children, and our boss has said to kill all 4 of them if you don't double your church in 30 days. What would you do, sir? And the man out loud said, I'll double my church in 1 week. Would he or would he not have doubled his church in 1 week? Yes or no? Absolutely. I want to get you to think through that for a minute. Because that whole denomination had decided they couldn't double their church. I said, in reality, maybe you thought it wasn't worth because you weren't paid enough. Or maybe you thought Jesus Christ didn't really put you there to take over the town for him. Or maybe you thought it wasn't a matter of life and death. Do you realize you, of course, can do it? You have to decide that that's why you're on earth. You're on earth, come to know Christ. And from that point to the last moment of my breath and your breath, it is to bear much fruit. Fruit's a good work. It's what you do for other people. Can you, if you have a Sunday school class, can you double it? Of course. If you're working with one school, can you find a way to work with 2 schools? Of course. If you have 180 girls come through who are thinking have an abortion, next year can you have 360? Of course. I remember talking to a pregnancy director down in Texas, south of here. And the year before I came to speak and meet with their board, they saved 7 children. The next year they saved 350. The next year they saved 792. That's not 10 times more, that's 100 times more. That's 7 to 792. Now, my point to you this morning is, do you realize this is why you're still here? This is why I'm still here. It's not for this life. It's for eternity. Because when you and I die, everything that we've done to that point is tallied up. And if it's done for his kingdom, for the right reason, then there is a reward that lasts forever. And so many of us have bought into this concept that it really doesn't matter if I live for Christ. Long as I'm born again, I'm getting into heaven, and that's all that matters. It's not all that matters. Why do you think in heaven Jesus says, I will wipe away your tears? It's because it's going to happen forever. The impact of it. And it will all be too late. This is your 39th anniversary. And I've spoken in hundreds and hundreds of churches, 60 countries. This church is extraordinary, honestly. But if this church got unleashed, I do mean the staff on the church, they already are unleashed. It's you. What are you really trying to do for God? And is it worthy of who you are as being created in the image of God? Is what you're trying to do going to be embarrassment to you when you finally see everything the way it really was? But the first thing that needs to happen, what turned my life around, was I had to repent. And I remember I felt 1,000,000 pounds, I did, on my shoulders for months. Not that I was under law. I wasn't under law. I'm under grace. But I felt for the first time in my life, don't blame poor results on me. If it's not working, fix it. If it's not growing, change it. You mean to keep track of things? Yes. Yes. One of those three is treasure. In the ministry, you don't typically make a lot of money. And because that's one of the things my wife and I really wanted to do 10 mina on, we sat down and for a couple of months talked about how much money before we died did we want to give to the kingdom. It's not how much money you make. It's how much money goes into his kingdom by giving it away to ministries and churches and individuals. And we set a very large number that was impossible to reach. And then I said to Darlene, God has given to us a platform to encourage other people. We should take that number and add a 0 to it for the amount of money we want to encourage other people to give away. And then we began to pray for that. Lord, come on. Yeah, but that's how it happens. You just don't, God, please use me. He's sick and tired of that. Use you to do what? Whatever you want. Stop delegating up to me. What do you want to do for me? What's on your heart? Jesus didn't tell these guys what to do. He said, you figure it out. I'll be with you. I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. Ask me for wisdom and I'll give it to you. But don't you delegate this up to me. Some of you have been waiting for 20 years for God to speak and tell you, and he's told you a long time ago, go get it. What? Whatever you want. Get it for me. If you love kids, go help kids. If you like older people, go help. Whatever you want. Then the Lord let us do this in shocking ways. Miracles. What do I mean by miracles? I mean, we set the number as an impossible number. But that gave us something we begged God for. Lord, show me how. Show us how. And then we went after it. And then we kept a little book every time we gave money away. It was a private book. Nobody knows what the number is, and nobody knows how much that's it. It's nobody's business. We kept writing. Why? He wants to know how much. How much? And how much are you after this? What are you doing with every talent you got? A friend, the lady, I'm going to end. The lady said to me, I can't do what you do. I said, well, thank God. It's hard enough in the world for one of me. Well, then I can't teach. Well, then don't teach. Well, I can't serve God. What? I don't know what to do. Well, what do you love to do? What do you mean? Who do you love to help? Oh, the old people. You do. I didn't know that. You like to help old people? Yes. I love going to those homes when the older people are just abandoned and go around and love on them because nobody does. Wow. Okay, that's the who. What do you want to do? I've got to remember this. This moved me emotionally. I want to make them feel special. I said, oh, Pat, that's wonderful. How do you want to do that? I think I'd like to make a fancy tea for them. A fancy tea? What do you mean? No, I want to bring different kinds of china in and make all these little finger foods and make hats. And wow, what will they think of that? Nobody's ever done that. And anything else you want to do? Yeah, I want to help them spiritually. I already talked to them when I go around bed to bed. Okay. Can you share something of what Christ means to you at the end of the dessert? You mean me? Sure. Yeah, I can. Okay, take pictures and send them to me. She did this. You should have seen the ladies. Then weeks went by, and another one. And then I said, I wonder if you could do this at another one of these homes. Well, yeah, I can. Do you know any of your friends who would love to learn how to do that? Well, yeah, she would. Why don't you bring her next time and ask her if she would take one of these? By the end of the second year, she had hundreds of old people that were being loved on and heard the gospel. What about you? Don't say you can't. Get out of here. Of course you can. It's just you don't understand. Every day you don't do something for the kingdom is a wasted day. And I'm here because I believe in my heart of hearts. I asked God to forgive me, and I turned my face toward the 10 mina. I didn't know how to do it, but I started. And by God's grace, okay. So if that's you, then how about it?